Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's start. Still some more people will join us, but we are a bit delayed and we still need to keep the closing time of this session, so I would suggest that we start the conversation. My name is Dirk van Damme. I'm leading a research entity in the OECD Directorate for Education and Skills. And we also do research on exactly the issues that we will be discussing today, non-cognitive, social-emotional skills. Let me start by introducing this topic of this panel debate by maybe just saying something very simple, that our education systems are very much tuned, very much geared towards success in cognitive skills. And allow me to make an analogy. I would say that cognitive skills are to education what GDP is to the economy. Meaning very important, but very one-sided, one-dimensional, only giving a fragmented image of what human beings can do and should learn in education and in life. We have come to the understanding that cognitive skills are only one side of the game, and there is a growing awareness, and I think the people in the panel are working on exactly these issues, that social and emotional skills, or if you prefer non-cognitive skills, or some people would say soft skills, that they are at least as important for individual success, but also for the quality of life in our societies. We know very well, and of course educators have known this for centuries, but we have not really integrated it well in our thinking and our policies about education. But we know that young people who learn to be more resilient, who have a higher self-esteem, who have a higher trust in other people, or who can engage in interpersonal communication, that they do better in their lives, that they often are more healthy, that they have more success on the labor market, that they realize personal growth and happiness, and that they contribute to societies. So the quality of their lives and the quality of societies in which they are living is enhanced by the quality of their social and emotional skills. We also know that on a societal level, a higher level of those skills is associated with less crime, better health, more democracy, more interpersonal trust, higher social integration, higher social cohesion or social capital, and indeed also a better economic climate. There is some interesting research that links social and emotional skills to better economic climate and ultimately also better economic growth. Very importantly, I think we should not oppose cognitive skills and social and emotional skills. They work alongside each other. And in our research, at least in the OECD, we have found very strong interactions between social and emotional skills development and cognitive skills development. High levels of motivation, high levels of self-esteem help young people to realize also and to take benefit from cognitive pedagogy. Even small gaps in the early stages of life in the development of social and emotional skills can develop in huge gaps in cognitive development later on in life. So it's very important to tackle this at a very early stage, and of course this is a tribute to the work of another Nobel laureate, Jim Heckman, who has advised us a lot on these things. But let me say that the development of social and emotional skills is a key element of successful schooling and also of closing the gaps, because we come to the understanding that gaps in social and emotional skills have a very strong relationship to social inequality in education, and that it's exactly the disadvantaged learners who struggle the most and who benefit the most from educational interventions targeted at social and emotional skills. So finally, another topic which is very much on the OECD's agenda is how can, if we think and if we know that this is important, how are we going to measure that? Because in education, as in many other spheres of life, what cannot be measured doesn't count. So we have to improve the measurement in order to advance also the development and the policies towards the development of social and emotional skills, and this is very much what we aim to do, and I don't think that a little bit of propaganda can harm. So we published an interesting book on these things, Skills for Social Progress, earlier this year, and we are engaging now in a very ambitious longitudinal study in many cities to measure and to monitor the development of cognitive and social and emotional skills over the lifetime. So let me finish here with these couple of introductory remarks. We have a very interesting panel, and all of them, I believe, are excellent speakers to this topic. And I would like to start with Jennifer Adams, who happens to be a compagnon de route in this journey for many years. She is the director of education in a school district, a very big school district in Ottawa, Canada. And I'm very happy to give you the floor, Jennifer.
Thank you, Dirk. And I'm just going to wait for the presentation to come up. Thanks very much, and it's wonderful to be here. I think of myself a little bit different than many of the people that are in this room. One of the things that I've really enjoyed about the conference so far is an opportunity to hear from policymakers. So many of you in this room are policymakers. You're defining social and economic policies in your countries, and you're measuring the impact of those policies. I think of myself, and probably some of my panel mates, as a policy player. You define the policies, and my job as a director of education in a large school district is to put that policy into play on the ground. And the impact of your work and our work hopefully has our economies moving forward and our social societies improving. So here's a little look at what we're doing in my school district, and it'll give you a sense of what's happening in Canada. Very quickly, just to provide some context, on an educational setting in Canada, there is no national education system. It is a provincial jurisdiction, so each of the 10 provinces and 3 territories look after their own education systems, but there's huge similarities across them. I'm going to talk a little bit about the structure that I work within, which is the Ministry of Education in Ontario. And you'll see that there are 4 priorities in our education system right now. The first one is excellence, and of course we take part in PISA, and we judge our ability to have high quality systems based in part on PISA assessments. One of the things that you'll see that's been a common theme here is the word equity, and we use equity as opposed to quality, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Public confidence is a huge piece in our school system. One of the things that I think is relatively unique in Canada is that the vast majority of children attend publicly funded systems. We have about 95 to 96% of our students that are in publicly funded education systems. And we don't take that for granted. We know that that's a constant thing that we have to put priority on, is to make sure that our parents feel that we have a well-structured, high-quality education system for them to continue taking part and having their children part of that. The one piece that has been added in the last year to the goals for our Ministry of Education is the area of well-being. And of course, that matches beautifully with the conference topic this year. One of the things that happened in 2009 is that the Education Act was changed to actually say that school boards were responsible not only for student achievement, but well-being as well. In our jurisdiction, we had done lots and lots of work on improving the quality of instruction and improving overall attainment of school outcomes. And interesting, because Dirk talked about this, well-being has always been a part of teaching. Every good teacher knows that for a child to be able to learn at high levels, they have to be well-fed, they have to be coming in a place where they're ready to learn. So that connection between well-being and student achievement has always been obvious in our school system. What we have done in the last couple of years is put more emphasis on the well-being piece to be a little bit more strategic and systematic in our approach at how we're getting at well-being. One of the things in our school system that we talk very explicitly about is that fair is not always equal. And I'm going to show you a little picture that gives you a sense of what we mean by that. So take a close look at the two pictures. And the one, of course, has equal, where everybody's standing on the same type of box to be able to see over top. And of course, what that ends up in is very different outcomes for students. So in Ontario and in our school district, we understand that fair does not mean equal. It actually means that we have to be providing additional supports and additional possibilities, additional opportunities for children that are most in need. We refer to that as closing the gap. One of the things that you'll see in Ontario, we have 72 different school districts. All of the school districts follow the same curriculum documents, and all of the school districts follow the same reporting expectations. And one of the things that happens that's very closely linked to our work in social emotional skills is that a number of years ago on the common provincial report card, this report card is the same report card for students in kindergarten all the way up to grade 12. And what they put up front was, instead of having the academic pieces reported out on first, the province decided to switch that around to lead with learning skills. And really it's a reflection of the fact that those learning skills are critical pieces of learning all the way from kindergarten to grade 12. And you'll see that when you look at the kinds of things that we're talking about there, our teachers are expected to report out on how well children are doing, showing a sense of responsibility, how well they're doing with organizing their work, how well doing with self-regulation. So for a number of years, all of our teachers from kindergarten to grade 12 are expected to report out twice a year on that to parents. Now I'm going to bring you a little bit closer to our school district and a couple of things that you should know. Our school district, I run a school district with 70,000 students in that school district. And there's some really interesting pieces. We have, being in the capital, we have families that come from all over the world. And what we have paid a real close attention to is the concept of closing the gap. So we have identified 4 groups of students that we think need additional support and additional resources for them to come out with high-level outcomes like the rest of our students in our school system. The first group is children with special needs. And so we have programs, special programs for those children with special education needs. A second group that we have is English language learners, and our school district is highly, highly diverse. We have 23% of our students in our schools today that speak something other than English and French in their home environment. And so the challenge, of course, is that every single one of our teachers, our administrators, our community members have to understand that the dynamics of having children that are in some process of learning a second language, and sometimes a third and a fourth, is an important piece to us. Our third grouping that we take a close look at is what we call First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, and of course those are our Indigenous peoples in Canada, and they typically have had challenges with meeting high outcomes, and so we look at them carefully. And of course the last one that we've had lots of conversation on is poverty. So those are the 4 groups that we think, how can we do our very best work to help those children be successful coming out of our system? We started work on thinking of social emotional skills in 2005, very initial efforts that we called our community of character, and we identified 10 different character or values that we wanted to be involving all of our children in, and that's been significant work. 2 years ago, we started with what we called our explicit look at well-being, and we designed a framework, and you'll see the link here so that at some point afterwards, if you want to take a look at it, you can. And basically, we looked at 3 elements of well-being. We looked at physical well-being. It's no surprise in North America that we have a challenge with having children eat properly and get proper exercise. We looked at the area of social emotional skills, looked at the whole idea of social emotional, mental health, etc. And we looked at cognitive skills and the ability for a child to be ready to learn. And a piece of work that came out that I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about is something that we called exit outcomes. We decided to go out to our community and to go through a process where we would ask them, what are the characteristics and skills that we would like every student who leaves our school system to have walking out the door? We brought together a community group that was made up of 50% of our staff people and 50% people from out in the community. We had business leaders, we had post-secondary leaders, we had some parents, and we had some students. And we did some initial research. We looked at 21st century skills research, we looked at employability skills research, and we came up with a draft that we put out to the community. What we were very surprised to see is this was something that our community grabbed onto, and they wanted to have a say in what are the characteristics and the skills that are most important. And these were the ones that our community came up with. And they're areas of resilience, globally aware, being collaborative, being innovative, creative, goal-oriented. And what we've done in our schools district since then is we've said, if these are the skills and characteristics that we want our children to have, then all of our professional learning, all of our in-school learning for our leaders and our teachers is built to be able to deliver these skills, make sure our teachers have these skills as well. So the next question was, how would we teach? And how would we assess these skills? And I'm going to talk a little bit about the teaching. One of the things that we think is absolutely critical is that we don't separate cognitive skill development from non-cognitive skill development. So we want to make sure that our teachers are embedding non-cognitive skills right into their everyday instruction. We want to make sure that we don't have teachers saying that we're going to do social skills on Friday afternoon and academic skills for the rest of the week. We want to make sure that that's very linked together. I'm going to give you a little video of a way that a kindergarten teacher was teaching this, and I'll give you just a sense of how this looks. And I want you, when you're looking at this video, to be thinking of 3 different things. The first thing that you'll notice is that the teacher was, and this is a kindergarten teacher, was starting a lesson on science. And she was starting to talk about trees and the environment. And she asked her children how they would like to learn, and they decided to write a storybook. The second thing that I want you to see is that you'll notice that it's cross-subject areas. So you see things about reading, about writing, about oral communications, and science. And the third thing that I'd like you to be looking for is the fact that you'll see that the children have brought in the social emotional skills, not the teacher. So I'm going to go to the video, and we'll take a quick look.
Thomas gets teased. Written by J.K. Monteith. Illustrated by J.K. Monteith. Hi, my name is Thomas. I am an apple tree. I live on the kindergarten playground. I am feeling sad today. Other trees are teasing me. Rainbow said, "We don't like you." I asked why. Rainbow said, "You don't even have any buds yet. I will get them soon," I said. We still don't like you, she said. Why? I'm a nice tree, but Rainbow didn't answer. I need to use my wits, I fight. W will walk away. I can walk, I'm a tree. Eyes for a noise, I don't want to noise, they are hiding my feelings. Teeth for talk it out. I tried and didn't work. S is for seek help. I need to tell the three teachers I called. What, Thomas? She asked. The other trees are hurting my feelings. Oh, tree teacher said to Rainbow and the other trees, please stop teasing Thomas. You'll make him feel sad. Rainbow said, but we're sad too. Oh, it's not fair. All the tulips grow around him. Tree teacher said, we can ask the children to grow tulips around you too. You still need to apologize to Thomas. We're sorry, Thomas, Rainbow said. That's okay, I said. The new tulips will look beautiful. I feel better now that I use my wits. The end!
So that gives you a quick idea of how the children are actually, the children were the ones that wrote this story. The teacher scribed for the children. And then the children naturally integrated the work on social skills into their learning. So we think that that's a good sign forward. Just to end up with a couple of, we're going to go back to the slides, just a couple of pieces. As far as how we're assessing, we are going to be taking part in the OECD major cities work, and so we'll have an assessment that way. The second way that we'll be assessing is we are in the process of developing a self-assessment tool that will be administered to all of our students in grade 7, in grade 10, and grade 12. And it will take a look at those 5 characteristics that we've developed, and the students will be self-assessing. Now, I know I have lots of measurement specialists here, and you're thinking that's probably not a good way of doing this. But what I want you to be thinking about is that my job as Director of Education is to actually be teaching students about the social skills. And so part of the reason why we're doing a self-assessment approach is the fact that we want every child from the time they're 4 to the time they're 18 to be learning what it means to be resilient. And we also want them to learn about what it means to be developing resiliency and what they need to do as their next steps. So that's why our approach. A couple of things, you'll just notice our strategic plan talks about equity, well-being, engagement, etc. And we're just going to finish off with one last slide. In Ontario, our graduation rate has been improving steadily over the last number of years, and in our school district, our graduation rate is about 86% of students that are coming out with the first level of diploma. We're very excited about that. We think that social skills and blending that with cognitive and non-cognitive are an important step forward. Last thing that I'll show you is that one of the things that we think are incredibly important in our school system is the equity measure. And of course, the PISA assessments, not only do they show relative strength, but they actually show the gap. And the thing that we're most proud of in Canada is the fact that between our highest performers and our lowest performers, there's a smaller gap. And that's what we're trying to keep as we move forward. Thanks very much.
You always impress me with what you are doing in Ontario and Canada. Our next speaker is Alejandro Adler from University of Pennsylvania in the US. Alejandro, you will also speak about how to foster these non-cognitive social and emotional skills with young children. Give you the floor.
Thank you so much, Dirk. The vision loads all before delving into the direct work on education that we've been doing around the world, I am going to start with the kind of perennial question of what is well-being. This is clearly a motif for this conference, but we've been approaching this, or the answer to this question from the discipline I come from, which is positive psychology. And as you've probably heard, there are different dimensions of well-being, and we've used what we call well-being theory, which integrates hedonic and eudaimonic approaches to well-being. So positive affect, hedonia, but also engagement or flow, positive relationships, meaning and purpose in life, and achievement, accomplishment, or mastery. And a short acronym that you can use to remember this is PERMA. So throughout the studies that I'm going to be showing, when I refer to well-being, I'm really referring to this model of well-being. So the second real question when we talk about well-being and education is really, can we genuinely teach and learn well-being? Can we increase well-being? Or is it just a private matter? Is it genetic? So I think luckily that's an empirical question. And before answering it, often we get the question of why well-being in schools. Schools are in the business of teaching students the academic skills that they need to get into college to eventually do well in the workplace. So I think there's an argument to be made for the intrinsic value of well-being, right? Well-being, since the Greek times, Aristotle, Socrates talked about the meaning and purpose of human life is to live well, the good life, to achieve well-being. In the East, Confucius talked about the same kinds of intrinsic values of well-being. So I think that's a philosophical debate, argument that can be made for the intrinsic value of well-being. But luckily, well-being, as many of you know, has instrumental value. Firstly, it has downstream effects on academic performance, luckily. So even if you're only in the business of enhancing academic achievement in schools, it's in your best interest to teach well-being. But it also has positive effects on physical health, on decreased consumption of alcohol and drugs, lower absenteeism, and the list continues. So once we can agree that well-being should be taught in schools, then we come back to the empirical question of, can we teach well-being? And about 5 years ago, we were reviewing the existing empirical evidence, and we'd seen that this had only been attempted to be answered in small settings, only small classroom settings. The biggest setting was a whole school. So we really asked, can we teach well-being at a large scale, and specifically at a whole nation scale? And after much discussion, we agreed that if there was a place in the world where this was going to work, it is Bhutan. So as many of you know, Bhutan is a very small country, the size of about Switzerland, between China and India. Since the 1970s, they used gross national happiness instead of GDP to guide the design of institutional architecture and policies. And so we said, if this is going to work at a large scale anywhere in the world, it is Bhutan. So we approached the Ministry of Education. Why? Again, and just to clarify, often GNH is misunderstood as just measuring how much people smile or subjective well-being. And it does, of course, incorporate psychological well-being. But as you'll see, GNH is a very comprehensive, multidimensional measure of genuine social progress, which includes time use, community vitality, health, education, ecological diversity and resilience, living. It does measure GDP, but the extent to which GDP is distributed in an egalitarian manner. So it's very much a GDP plus Human Development Index plus other domains of progress. So as I said, we approached the Ministry of Education, and after fruitful conversations with them, we decided to start this initiative of education for gross national happiness, educating students around the country to genuinely enhance this multidimensional measure of well-being and happiness. So what did we do? The ultimate goal was to create a G&H curriculum to implement in all 507 secondary schools in the country. Again, part of the reason we chose this country, there are about 700,000 people in the country, fairly homogenous, mostly Buddhist, so well-being is embedded in the cultural DNA of the country. But before that, and we chose 10 life skills, which we called life skills, socio-emotional skills, but life skills which both had the most empirical evidence for enhancing well-being and which were most culturally and contextually relevant. So these were mindfulness, critical thinking, decision-making, communication, creative thinking, empathy, problem solving, interpersonal relationships, resilience, and self-awareness. So of course, before going to scale in the 507 secondary schools in the country, we decided to run a pilot randomized controlled trial in the country. So we chose 18 representative secondary schools, about 8,000 studies in different regions in Bhutan, and they were randomly assigned to either receive the G&H curriculum or a placebo G&H curriculum to be in the control condition. So what do we do? Of course, as Dirk mentioned, not only do we don't care about if we don't measure something, we don't care about it, but we really can't change it if we don't measure it. So we used a validated measure of PERMA, of well-being in youth. So we went around to these different schools and collected mostly survey data to assess well-being. And then before actually implementing the G&H curriculum, we introduced the Educating for G&H curriculum in all 18 schools. So we, after talking to teachers, students, parents, we realized that before teaching these skills for well-being, people had to know the why behind why we should be learning these skills. So we introduced this not only to teachers and students, but also to parents. Why? Because we also wanted to reduce the dissonance between the messages that students were receiving in schools and the messages and the education they were receiving in their domestic environments. So then came 15 months of actually implementing this G&H curriculum. And as Jennifer was mentioning, we not only taught these life skills co-curricularly in terms of period 1 math, period 2 science, period 3 life skills course, but we also infused existing subjects with life skills. So for example, in every single secondary school in the intervention group, we started organic gardens where students grew vegetables and other plants, and through learning the art of botany, they learned about the genetics of plants, the taxonomy, the physiology, and they were really able to apply what they were learning in biology, chemistry, physics, even mathematics. They were learning about the economic value of food, right? And not only that, but they were learning to think critically, creatively, do problem solving. So they were integrating different disciplines, different academic subjects, living them and learning these life skills simultaneously. And again, the control schools, we taught a placebo curriculum where they learned about physical health, psychology, and nutrition. And just to quickly go over the results, well, so this was a 15-month intervention, and you can see a few of the images there, practicing mindfulness. And again, this was representative schools. One of the schools we worked with was a monastic school. For some reason, the monks really enjoyed volleyball in this specific school. There you can see the organic gardens that we started in different schools. And of course, there was a post-intervention measurement with the same students, except for the 12th graders who had already graduated and the new 7th graders who didn't take the baseline measurement. What did we find? We found that compared to control schools, students in the intervention schools, their well-being increased significantly, And not only did it increase significantly right after the intervention, but 1 year after the intervention, we did a reassessment of their well-being, and these differences remain significant. And when we talked to the students, they said learning these skills was like no other academic subject. It didn't feel like a burden, something that they just had to regurgitate to pass an exam, but rather they were really reaping the fruits of practicing these life skills in an academic setting and beyond. What we didn't expect, but were incredibly pleasantly surprised to find, were the impact of teaching, of learning these life skills on their academic performance. So again, to reiterate, well-being and academic performance are not only mutually exclusive, but rather mutually reinforcing. So we saw that on average, students in intervention schools did about half a standard deviation better than students in baseline schools and in control schools. And at baseline, there was no difference. And again, a year after the end of the intervention, these differences remained significant. And for those of you who are familiar with the education literature, know that most interventions aimed exclusively at enhancing academic performance have an impact of 0.15 to 0.25 standard deviations. And again, this was closer to 0.5. So what we found, and I'll talk about this more in our replication studies, is that if you have limited resources and you want to enhance students' academic performance, you will reap more academic dividends by investing in their well-being than by investing in teaching them more hours of school and investing directly in academic achievement. So I'll just underscore that again. You get more academic dividends by investing in youth well-being than by investing in teaching them more academic material, which was a fascinating and unexpected finding for us. So the findings also showed that teaching these life skills also contributed to better physical health, less visits to the nursery, decreased absenteeism. Again, when you visited these schools, both teachers and students were much more engaged. It's not that they had to be there, but they actually wanted to be there. There was a whole ecosystem change in the school environment, and therefore a higher satisfaction with the school experience, again, both for students, teachers, principals, and staff, and therefore also lower dropout rates. So after that, the big question was, are these results unique to such an enabling environment like Bhutan, or can we replicate these findings in other more noisy environments? So we went to their neighbor country, Nepal, and we've been working. I mean, it's demographically somewhat similar to Bhutan, but it does use GDP as its standard metric of social progress, as most countries do. The population is about 30 times the size of Bhutan. It's much more heterogeneous than Bhutan. And so we've been working with about 40 schools in Nepal since 2012, everything from slum schools to wealthy private schools. And luckily, the results have replicated. Teaching these life skills simultaneously enhance multidimensional well-being and academic achievement. And really, for those of you who've been to India, you know that if something works in a place like India, it'll probably work in most other places in the world. So since 2012, we've been working a lot of our time in South Asia. Why? Because about a fourth of the world's population lives there, but it's a particularly young population in the world. About 1 billion people in South Asia have the age to be either in school or in university. So we think it's a particularly fertile ground for this new educational paradigm to really permeate the society in this region of the world. And we're currently working with over 1,000 students in this region of the world. And as you'll hear from Paola later right now, and from Hector Escamilla from Tech Milenio, it's been a blossoming movement here in Latin America too. In Peru, we partnered with the World Bank, the Ministry of Education, to start this initiative with 700 schools In Colombia, we're currently working with 430 schools. We've been engaging with schools in Latin America to very different degrees. In Mexico, again, Paula will tell you about the Ministry of Education and the work they're doing with 4,000 high schools all over the country. Tech Milenio is infusing all of their 40 campuses around the country with well-being and meaning and purpose as the main objective, together with academic performance as well. In Chile, we're working with 20 schools. And really, the next question that we're currently exploring is, can this be a feasible new academic paradigm at a global scale? And as most of you know, the golden standard for academic performance is currently the OECD's Program for International Student Assessment, or PISA. So when I show this to you, you've probably seen these rankings before, but as you can see, they do reflect the quote-unquote old education paradigm, which measures math, science, and reading skills, so traditional cognitive skills. Luckily, in 2015, we've been working with the OECD, and PISA is going to be measuring different components of well-being, and you'll be seeing that those results in the next couple of years. And finally, there's a new International Positive Education Network. Researchers, practitioners from over 80 countries are part of this online platform where everything from scientists to teachers and everything in between share best practices so that really we can facilitate the advancement of this new global education model, which we have seen is not only feasible but desirable. So I'll end with that. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. Fascinating stuff, really. Congratulations. Our next speaker is Francisco Marmolejo. I'm very glad that he is here, not only because he's a long-time friend, and also because he travels a lot and it's difficult to get him, but also because he's going to speak about higher education, because many people still think that fostering social and emotional skills is something that the school should do, and then at the age of 18 we are supposed to have these well-rounded individuals who should perform academically in the universities. So Francisco, I'm looking forward to your remarks.
Thank you very much, Derek. And I'm extremely pleased to be participating at this conference for many reasons. First, because I think OECD stage is a very important place to discuss policies and then to try to figure out what might be better for the future world. And secondly, because it is happening in my own state, Jalisco, here in Mexico. So I'm very pleased to be back home. And so being said that, if you don't mind, I will prefer to shift from Spanglish to speaking Spanish today. So I will invite the ones who need an interpreter device to do that if you want to understand some of the jokes that I will be presenting in Spanish. Derek, cuando estuvimos conversando acerca del tema.
When we were talking about abilities of skills for life, one of the great questions had to deal precisely with the role of higher education. At the end of the line, higher education is the end of the pipeline of the formal education system, but at the same time, it is the great formal beginning as well of the work on life and the bringing together and living together for all those individuals that have reached higher education. It is very important to discuss this topic, which is the contribution that the higher education should have by perfecting the skills, life skills for individuals. The good news is that the environment and current contexts are fertile ground in order to have a better and higher education worldwide. We must acknowledge that these are grounds where we see good competence, where there are many things that all of a sudden you intend to do, but it would seem that every everybody wants to do exactly the same thing. Obviously, there's a great need of being much more creative in finding a much more innovative way to make that higher education would not be exactly the same, and that it will meet the challenges of today with full individuals that really have the right skills for which they have been formed for, but especially that they will be responsible according to the context they live in. World Bank, we have identified different challenges that are faced by higher education worldwide. Very briefly, I want to mention some of them. One has to do with the fact that there is a huge trend to assume that the only place where you can learn higher education is at the universities, and this stereotype idea that we have of a university, as long as higher education is much more diverse than a university. Transition lines on the educational system as a whole are quite limited. And that is why I'm very glad to see the discussion that we're holding today. We can see it from a holistic perspective of previous education system, the transition of the entire system, and on the terminal phase of educational system. Otherwise, we are at risk of what has happened during history. There is a duplicity of efforts, fragmentation in which the students start to learn through our time in educational system, and we end up by knowing a little bit of anything without having coherence in studies. I will not refer to them in full detail because I cannot read the screen, some of the things that you will be able to see. If you don't have any inconvenience, I will stand up so I can continue and see what is projected on the screen. We live in a world that has a completely different context, and we need to understand it much better. At international context, we see that on the first part of the last decade, there was important economic growth worldwide. We can also see that in the second part, this growth has stagnated. This growth, obviously the stagnation and growth, mainly worldwide, lead us to a series of phenomena. On one hand, limited growth of employment have lost the opportunity of this generational development to foster more growth and more distribution of well-being, and obviously at stress that is there because of the demographic growth in the world. We know that people are migrating more and more into the cities, that the phenomenon of the adequation of education system, especially higher education system, has to be centered more on the people when we're talking urban areas. It will be growing more where there are more resources. Population developed world will be reduced. The case of Italy is an emblematic case where you know that today diapers for the elderly are higher than the diapers sold for babies. We see a world that's becoming older, and the rates of the elderly are very high, and we see other parts of the world where there's a high proportion of population that are still young and that demand to be trained with another mindset and other skills than the ones that we received when we were trained. The case in Northern Africa, where over half of the population is less than 20 years old. Africa will be the region of the world that will be experiencing the highest demographic growth rate in the next decade from here to 2050. What I mean is that that is a place where the world be growing. That's where we will have childhood and young people, and that's where we have to find the way to train them and teach them in different skills than the ones that we have been living. There will be huge pressure for talent. There will be huge migration from countries, developed countries, from countries in development to developed countries. There will be an aging of population in those countries, and if we transfer that to the present, OECD has found by different analysis, as well as the World Bank, that globally skills are migrating towards the skills of knowledge of new economies. It happens in developed countries, as you can see on the image on the screen, as well as in countries in development. We know that not all education systems are preparing appropriately youth. We're trying to face new challenges, but applying recipes of the past. That's where we have to have a better coordination in the entire education system and a better approach to what is happening outside the education system. According to the analysis we carry out at the bank, if we compare with other obstacles, it's still being the topic of the abilities, the main obstacle, the main restriction that the employers face in order to absorb these needs. We also know that there's a change on social perception regarding on the role of university. We still think of the university that at the university things should not change and that they have always been fine as they are. But we know that there are communities that are not fully convinced and that they are demanding and they are impatient about the need that higher education should adapt better to the changing conditions of the environment. We know that higher education is not always working jointly with the other players around it. We see that they are not linked. We see that graduates of the institutions, research institutions, organizations at a community, the previous levels of education, among others. We know that there is difficulty of communication among higher education institutions. So to summarize, employers complain that graduates coming from higher education do not have the skills that they need. And this is something quite interesting because if you ask educators, us as educators will say that yes, we are training the best graduates in the education system. There is not a university that would be proud by saying on their mission that they teach the best students in the world, and there's no university that will tell you that their graduates are not the best. But from the survey, 72% said that what they did was the best, but the employer said what they were doing that was wrong. So the hypothesis that I present to you is that the employers and the market of employers are asking for skills that are different from those that we give at the higher education. Another disconnection is amongst higher education institutions and even inside the same higher education institution. There is a trend of having these interdisciplinary barriers, and it is a regretful problem that higher education institutions face. The demand, obviously, of those skills could be changing undoubtedly in the future, as we can observe according to the figures that are being presented, because there's a mismatch between what we're doing in higher education and what is being required by the contractors or employers. Here you can see some of the professions that will be disappearing and the new professions that will be coming about in future times. Throughout expansion, and there's a huge demand, obviously, in countries where you have a great number of young people that has been having a good coverage at primary and secondary and upper secondary levels, and that they see university as a good aspirational expectations. Well, we need to provide them with more spaces at higher education. The truth is that we expected that demography will be the main driver of higher education growth in the years to come. Higher education will be experiencing a huge diversification and a huge growth. We also know that this pressure will not be lasting for many years. It will be lasting around 15 or 20 years more in some countries, such is the case of Mexico, as for the first time in this generation, there will be a slight decline according to the amount of students or the cut of students that are aiming to achieve higher education studies. Then we can see the advantages of higher education benefits. This is the return on education. On average, one person per each degree, it has 10% more of economic income.
De educación.
Nevertheless, see the case of Latin America and the Caribbean with a high return on higher education as compared to other levels. We know that in Africa, a growth in the capacity of the society of knowledge can mean a significant increase on the GDP per capita income of African people. And we know that it's not only a matter of money, we know that it is a matter of social benefits that education can contribute with. There are several pieces of information that suggest that higher education is the main factor of social mobility in our society. We know as well that mothers who have higher education tend to have sons and daughters with higher education degrees. We also know that higher education transforms into the construction of citizenship of people. We also know that more education leads to more awareness, and that leads to healthier lives, to longer lives, and we also know that it trains people who are more tolerant and more aware on the environment. But many of these things happen in spite of the higher education system, because in this system, as Dirk was saying, we tend to emphasize technical skills, cognitive skills, because we assume that some others have already taken care of the training of people as such, and this is an error of the higher education system. Vice Rector was saying that if the university waives the training mission that it has, then it is going to create barbaric people. And this is important because students that are attending university nowadays are different from students that we were. We know now that in this year, 2015, it will be the first generation worldwide of university-level students who are digital natives. And I have 2 minutes, and I have like 300 slides. But anyway, if you are willing to have the presentation, I can give it to you afterwards. We know that young people today use technology in a different way. We know that young people today have a different way on processing information that is not sequential, that is multitask, that they are constantly overflooded with a number of all these gadgets. And we also know that they know more about technology than their fathers and mothers, and they know more technology than their teachers. So, in one way or another, that breaks the conventional scheme of understanding what education is all about. So, please, let's go to slide 42 in order to wrap up. Obviously, we already know that there is a formula, and the formula is more and better education. But of course, the question is what type of education? And that is where I intend to say that in the future, work will not necessarily be based on unidimensional training or technical training. People will need to be able to change in environments that are not necessarily the same. And this is not anything new. This has been going on. And if the audience was asked here, how many of you have changed your career or your profession? How many of you do something different as that for which you were trained? Please raise your hand. And a lot of people, you can tell by the times, by the hands we are seeing, we can see that people are switching. I mean, you have to eat, and that is what you have to do. But of course, this is something that is new. And that is something is that even though it's not quite new, we know that it has been stressed. These are some of the titles of and professions for the future. And the main characteristic is that they are new. And I like the one talking about ethnoepidemiologist, musician. And believe it or not, they are all professions of today. They are people who have are better fit for a changing environment in spite of what they learned in higher education institutions. So in the World Bank study on skills, we talk about skills or lack of skills as a major obstacle for development. The need for the combination of soft skills and high cognitive skills is very important, additional to the improvement in terms of incentives, in terms of capacity building, and better information systems in order to foster this change. I would like to wrap up by saying that graduates required in today's world should have technical skills, but above all, they should be able to work in teams. They should be able to adapt to multicultural contexts, and they should have the capacity to understand the world, but without losing the sense of responsibility with local communities, and have the capacity of speaking at least one second language to be able to think on a different language. And they should be people who have the capacity to correctly use technological tools and information systems. And lastly, individuals who are curious and have the necessary skills to keep on learning all their lives, because in the best case scenario, upon graduation, maybe they are very good, but you know that the day after that, a great amount of what we learned at school will be useless. So if we awaken that curiosity, these people learn that they will have to learn all their lives, and I'm certain that they will be successful professionals who will be able to change time and again. Beyond this, we are nurturing people with sound humanistic preparation, with general education, and with attitudes and skills. All of these vis-a-vis the world they will be living in. There are significant differences between what we learn in life and what we learn at school. And I would like to conclude by saying that the scenario that we have before us is completely different and will be far more different in the future. We have the need to change the paradigm on higher education and change it, understanding higher education as part of a wider context. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Francisco. You did. And after this very grand overview, I'm very happy to give the floor to Paula, not only because you are making this panel one of the more gender balanced of the whole forum, but also because you will have the opportunity to demonstrate and to talk to some of the amazing accomplishments that happened here in our host country in Mexico. Please.
Thank you very much. It's not. Do you want to use this? ¿Quieres usar este?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I am really happy and grateful for being here. Well, first of all, as you can notice, English is not my native language, so I'll have to use my own social-emotional skills to communicate whatever I need to express today. I would also like to point out that 3 panelists here, we are from Mexico, and I hope this means that Mexico is somehow leading the discussion of the importance of social-emotional skills or skills in general. So very happy to share this panel with you. And so Alejandro has already talked about the importance of social-emotional skills in general. And today I'm going to talk about what we're doing in Mexico in upper secondary education. So I will rather focus my presentation on the challenges we have faced when implementing this type of interventions. So if you could please show, thanks. So I'm going to talk about the Construyete program, which is an intervention that promotes social-emotional skills in upper secondary education. Upper secondary in Mexico includes grades 10, 11, and 12, or students between the ages of 15 and 18. So first of all, in Mexico, the role of social-emotional skills on education outcomes is increasingly evident. This graph shows the role of perseverance on, or the effect of perseverance on the proportion of students who perform well in mathematics at the national test in upper secondary education per socioeconomic condition. So as you can see, the level of perseverance can explain up to 3 times the difference or the increase in the proportion of students who perform well despite their economic condition, their socioeconomic condition. So basically, the higher the level of perseverance, the highest the proportion of students who perform well despite their socioeconomic context. Another important aspect to point out is that when perseverance is high, the proportion of students who perform well from unfavorable socioeconomic conditions is even higher than the proportion of students who come from more favorable contexts. But social-emotional skills in Mexico also seem to be very important for life decisions among adolescents. So basically, 9 out of 10 students, or actually 9 out of 10 high school graduates, never consider dropping out of school. 9 out of 10. In contrast, basically 6 out of 10 high school dropouts always thought about dropping out of school when they made the decision. So the question is, what is it? What does it explain, these results? Is it greed? Is it responsible decision making? But there is clear evidence that is something going on among these students. So in 2014, Mexico's Ministry of Education, following public policy recommendations, undertook an important process to transform the Construyete program into a social-emotional learning intervention. So Construyete aims to develop social-emotional skills among students, high school students, teachers, and school principals. We are currently working in 4,000 public high schools with an enrollment of approximately 2.6 million students, as I said, in grades 10, 11, and 12, at the national level, so basically in the 32 states of Mexico. And Construyete is actually designed and completely financed by the Ministry of Education, specifically by the Undersecretariat of Upper Secondary Education, and implemented along with the United Nations Development Program. For these reasons, I mean, given its scale and coverage, Construyete is one of the largest interventions in the world on social-emotional learning. And the most interesting aspect is that we were able to implement this intervention in only 1 year. So Construyete, following international best practices, basically has 3 implementation strategies. The first one is teacher training. So we train teachers in social-emotional learning so that they can develop their own social-emotional skills and then develop these skills among their students. So far, we have trained 11% of teachers and 24% of school principals from public upper secondary education in Mexico. So this means approximately 25,000 people in only 1 year. And the second strategy is to provide schools with technical guidance to improve their school management on school climate. So basically, on regular basis, an NGO visits a school to help the school principal and the school staff to improve school climate and promote social-emotional learning. And then the third strategy that we promote is the development of very practical and innovative materials for students, teachers, and school principals. The interesting aspect of these materials, here I'm showing you an example of a Construyete card, is that they are only 1 page long, and they set clearly whether they are, what type of social-emotional skill they are promoting or they seek to develop, whether they are, they want to work with teachers or students or school principals, and basically they provide very basic and clear steps for students or teachers or principals to carry out activities, whether in the classroom or in the school or even in their households. So far we have approximately 150 materials online. They are available for everyone, so if you want to check them out, they are online, basically at the Construyete webpage. And the idea is that these become available for all the schools. I would also like to point out that in this sense, Construyete is perceived as a rather short-term, medium-term intervention that wants to help schools to promote social-emotional learning. Construyete does not work directly with a curriculum, even though the curriculum in upper secondary education in Mexico includes social-emotional skills. So one of the aspects we were supposed to deal with in this panel is the importance of measurement. So measuring social-emotional skills is definitely important, but it's actually very complex. So in Construyete, we are not only concerned about measuring these skills, we also want to measure the processes that schools need to follow to promote social-emotional learning. So Construyete promotes 18 social-emotional skills, as you can see them. Those in the blue section correspond to personal aspects, such as, for example, stress management or frustration tolerance or emotional awareness. And those in the red category have to do with interpersonal aspects, so basically empathy or interpersonal conflict management and so on. And those in the green category have to do with decision-making, responsible decision-making, for example, critical thinking or the analysis of consequences. So besides these skills, we are also very concerned about measuring, well, first of all, about setting clear definitions of social-emotional skills. We believe that if we have very clear definitions, it will be much easier for teachers to promote and develop these skills in the classroom. If they don't have a clear idea of what they need to teach, it's going to be very hard for them to actually do it in the practice. And this means using or promoting the use of social-emotional language in the classroom. So basically naming emotions, naming skills, and using these skills as part of the curriculum and as part of the daily activities in the classroom. And our goal, of course, is to strengthen the relationship between teacher and students. So basically, the message is that we're not only measuring these skills through an impact evaluation or the learning of these skills, we're also very concerned about the way that schools implement these processes on a daily basis. So I would like to share with you some of the lessons we've learned in the past year. I mean, we know that Construyete is a very interesting, and we believe it's a beautiful program, but it's one also full of implementation challenges. So the very first lesson we would like to share is that if you want to implement this type of interventions in your home country, you need to be prepared to develop your own social-emotional skills, specifically stress management. And the reason is that these programs require plenty of coordination and communication. Without proper coordination, it's very hard to implement them, especially in the short run. In the case of Construyete, we only had 1 year, actually less, to implement this new design. The second lesson is that in large-scale social-emotional learning interventions, such as Construyete, in the short run, the watered-down effect of training teachers is unavoidable, yet is manageable. And one of I would say, the strategies to prevent this is, as I said, setting clear definitions of social-emotional learning in general and social-emotional skills in particular. The third lesson is that the most important challenge is actually modifying teaching practices in the classroom. I mean, I have presented the example of materials we use, but the most important challenge, and I have to be really honest here, is that teachers will not always change, or at least not in the short run, the way they teach. So it is very important that teachers believe and feel that this is important for their own well-being and for their teaching practice. Once they believe and feel this, the rest is piece of cake. So I'm only saying this as a suggestion in case, of course, you want to develop this type of intervention. So the fourth lesson is that all carrot, no-stick programs, as Construyete is not mandatory, it's only voluntary, require innovative and interesting training methodologies. Again, teachers need to believe this is important for them. Teachers need to believe or need to feel the effect on their well-being of developing this type of skills. So if you don't have an intervention that is actually mandatory, it's going to be very hard to change teaching practices in the classroom. The fifth lesson is that measuring social-emotional skills separately, I mean every skill separately, is actually very complex. And the reason is that they are all very connected. It's very hard to measure empathy without measuring active listening, for example, or very hard to measure stress management without measuring emotional awareness. So they are all extremely connected, and that is why it's so complex to measure each of them in particular. So in Construyete, we're not only trying to measure these skills separately, but also sort of somehow measuring the level of social-emotional learning in students, teachers, and principals. The sixth lesson is that focusing on the right approach can definitely persuade education stakeholders to promote this type of interventions in the education sector. So to give you an example, before Construyete, before the new design of Construyete, the typical approach that the Ministry of Education in Mexico will use to improve school climate will be preventing violence. So that will be sort of a negative approach, right? It will be about preventing, not about building. So one of the things we were able to do or achieve with Construyete was to really push a positive approach, to talk about building or improving school climate beyond merely preventing violence. And this was actually something very successful because other education levels are now promoting this type of approach. So if you are hesitating about implementing this type of programs in your home country, my suggestion will be to start by having the right approach or by promoting the right approach.
Paula,
and then finally, just to conclude, I would like to say that where there is a will, there is definitely a way. If you are really committed to promoting social-emotional learning, there is no obstacle that can impede you doing so. Thanks.
Thank you all.
Muchísimas.
To see how much we agree on all these things. And I think that this is very encouraging for the future. I have also some very bad news. We don't have the time to take any questions. So you will have noticed that we have run out of time, and the press conference with the OECD Secretary General is going to happen immediately now. So I have to break up this session, but I would like to thank you very warmly for your attendance and for your interest in this topic. Thank you so much.